The autumn of 1943. The Dnieper, a majestic water barrier that became the frontier between life and death for hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers. The crossing of this river turned into one of the bloodiest operations of the entire Great Patriotic War, claiming tens of thousands of lives in a matter of days. The wide Dnieper waters, stained with blood, became a symbol of immeasurable sacrifice in the struggle for the liberation of Ukrainian land. After the defeat of the Germans near Kursk, the Soviet command sought to develop the success and prevent the enemy from consolidating their positions on the western bank of the Dnieper. The order was categorical: to force the crossing on the move without waiting for the preparation of special crossing means. Strategic necessity collided with harsh reality. Soldiers crossed on whatever they could find: rafts made of logs, fishing boats, makeshift pontoons. Under the relentless fire of the enemy who occupied the dominant heights of the right bank, this crossing became a true hell. The Battle of the Dnieper determined the further course of the war, opening the way to the liberation of all Ukraine. But the cost of this breakthrough proved to be exorbitantly high. Even today, historians dispute the exact number of casualties, and the testimonies of participants make one shudder at the scale of the tragedy. The summer of 1943 became a turning point in the Great Patriotic War. After the devastating defeat at Kursk, the German command definitively lost strategic initiative. The Wehrmacht was forced to go on the defensive along the entire Eastern Front, hastily retreating to the last natural line on Soviet territory, the Dnieper River. Hitler placed enormous hopes on the so-called Eastern Wall, a defensive line running along the Dnieper. In his orders, he demanded these positions be held at all costs. "The Dnieper will sooner flow backwards than the Russians will cross it," the Führer declared to his generals, and indeed, the natural conditions turned the river into an ideal defensive line. A wide channel up to 700 meters, a depth of up to 12 meters, a strong current, and most importantly, a high right bank, rising 100 to 150 meters above the left. The Germans maximally exploited these advantages. Multi-tiered firing points, minefields, and wire entanglements were equipped on the commanding heights of the right bank. Artillery controlled all possible crossing points. Wehrmacht engineering units prepared for a prolonged defense, creating fortified areas up to 20 kilometers deep. The Soviet command perfectly understood that if the enemy was given time to entrench itself on this line, breaking through the defense would require many months of fighting and colossal sacrifices. That is why, on September 24, 1943, the Stavka of the Supreme High Command issued a directive demanding to force the Dnieper on the move, without an operational pause. Stalin's order was categorical. This order had fatal consequences for hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers. The very idea of forcing such a powerful water barrier without preparation, special means, and proper reconnaissance contradicted all canons of military art. But political ambitions proved higher than military expediency. Stalin sought to liberate Kiev by the anniversary of the October Revolution, which required an incredible acceleration of the offensive's pace. Front commanders found themselves in a desperate situation. On the one hand, they understood the suicidal nature of such a decision. On the other, failure to comply with the Supreme Commander's order threatened a tribunal. As a result, one of the most dramatic battles of the war began, where the heroism of soldiers clashed with the ruthless reality of an unprepared operation. Soviet troops approached the Dnieper exhausted by a multi-day march. Rear services fell behind, ammunition was running out, pontoon units were delayed. But the order was not open to discussion, to force immediately, at all costs. commanders on the ground made the only possible decision: to cross using improvised means under a hail of enemy fire. By the autumn of '43, Soviet command faced an almost impossible task. Forcing the Dnieper required meticulous preparation, the concentration of special crossing equipment, and engineering support. However, there was no time for this. The Stavka demanded immediate action to prevent the enemy from consolidating on the western bank. Front commanders, Vatutin, Konev, Rokossovsky, found themselves caught between military necessity and political pressure from above. The Stavka's directive of September 24th left no choice: to force a crossing on the move with improvised means without waiting for the arrival of pontoon units. Sappers, reaching the river, faced a catastrophic shortage of crossing equipment. The troops had only about 30% of the necessary pontoons and boats. Soldiers frantically began collecting everything that could stay afloat: fishing boats from coastal villages, barrels, planks, logs. Primitive rafts were constructed from makeshift materials. Soldiers tied logs with wire, stuffed ground sheets with straw to use them as floats. Some units used empty ammunition boxes fastened together. Commanders of engineering units recalled that they had never before seen such widespread, self-made creativity. A particular problem was created by the lack of time for reconnaissance. Soviet command had only a general idea of the German defense system on the right bank. Enemy firing points, minefields, and artillery positions were not precisely identified. This led to many crossings taking place under direct fire from German machine guns and artillery. The desire of the High Command to time the liberation of Kiev with the anniversary of the October Revolution also played a fatal role. Thousands of lives were sacrificed for the sake of political symbolism. General Vatutin, commander of the Voronezh Front, received a categorical order to take the Ukrainian capital by November 7th at any cost. This demand led to the hasty selection of the Bucharin bridgehead as the main direction of attack, a decision that later proved erroneous and cost many lives. The critical situation was exacerbated by the lagging of logistical services. Troops who had made a multi-day march to the Dnieper experienced an acute shortage of ammunition, food, and medicine. Many units approached the river with only a third of their standard complement of shells and cartridges. This meant that units that had crossed to the right bank found themselves practically defenseless against enemy counterattacks. Commanders on the ground showed miracles of ingenuity, trying to compensate for the lack of means and time. For example, in some divisions, special groups of good swimmers were created, who crossed the river at night and established themselves on the opposite bank, creating small bridgeheads. Then the main forces crossed over to them. However, such improvisations could not replace full-fledged engineering preparation for the operation. September 22, 1943. Advanced units of Soviet troops reached the Dnieper. Before them lay a body of water, 400 to 700 meters wide. On the opposite bank, on dominant heights, the enemy had already entrenched himself. There was no time to wait for special crossing equipment. Every hour of delay allowed the Germans to strengthen their defenses. Scouts and small assault groups were the first to begin the crossing. They used anything that could stay afloat. Private Ivan Semyonov from the 181st Rifle Division recalled, "We built a raft from 5 logs found in a ruined village. Instead of oars, we used fence boards. We crossed at night, without a single shot, so as not to give ourselves away. Of the 12 people in our group, only 7 reached the bank." Red Army soldiers showed incredible ingenuity. Fishing boats, fuel barrels, house doors, and bundles of reeds were all pressed into service. Soldiers stuffed their raincoats with straw, turning them into makeshift floats. Some swam across the river, holding on to logs or empty canisters, Especially tragic was the fate of those who could not swim. According to participants, many soldiers drowned before reaching the middle of the river. The Dnieper's current, particularly strong in autumn, swept away rafts and makeshift boats. Survivors recounted how their comrades, wounded or exhausted, simply disappeared into the dark waters. General Chuikov's 8th Guards Army began the crossing in the area of Dneprodzerzhinsk. Approximately 500 people crossed to the right bank on the first day. By the end of the second day, fewer than 200 remained. The rest perished under enemy fire or while attempting to deliver ammunition across the river. The battalion of Captain Nefedov from the 243rd Rifle Division achieved incredible heroism. At dawn on September 26th, 120 soldiers on makeshift rafts began crossing south of Kremenchug. The Germans discovered them when the rafts reached the middle of the river. Torrential machine gun and mortar fire opened up. The water around them boiled with explosions. Only 67 people reached the right bank, but they managed to capture a small bridgehead and held it for 2 days until reinforcements arrived. The statistics of the first days of the crossing are striking in their tragedy. According to the headquarters of the Voronezh Front, out of every 10 soldiers who began the crossing, only an average of 3 to 4 reached the opposite bank. The rest died under fire, drowned, or were carried away by the current. The first echelons suffered particularly heavy losses. They bore the full brunt of German fire, without artillery support. Artillery remained on the left bank and could not effectively suppress enemy strongpoints due to the absence of spotters on the right bank. Historian Boris Sokolov, in his research, cites terrible figures. In the first week of the Dnieper crossing, the irrecoverable losses of Soviet troops amounted to about 35,000 people. Most of them died directly during the crossing. Despite the colossal sacrifices, by the end of September, 23 bridgeheads of various sizes had been established on the right bank of the Dnieper. The largest were the Bukrin and Lyutezh bridgeheads south and north of Kiev. It was these that played a decisive role in the subsequent liberation of the Ukrainian capital. The German command turned the right bank of the Dnieper into an impregnable fortress. Nature itself aided the defenders. The high western bank, towering 50 to 70 meters above the eastern one, created ideal conditions for observation and firing. The enemy positioned artillery and machine gun nests on commanding heights, organizing a multi-tiered system of fire. Every square meter of the water's surface was swept by crossfire. German observers from the high bank saw any attempt at crossing and immediately called in an artillery strike. Shells and mines literally plowed the water's surface, turning it into a boiling cauldron. Artilleryman Kurt Wagner, a participant in the Dnieper defense, later recalled, "We saw the Russians as if in the palm of our hand. When they tried to cross during the day, it was suicide. Our guns didn't have time to cool down." The topography of the Dnieper complicated the task of forcing the river to the extreme. The river's width at crossing points reached 600 to 700 meters, with a depth of up to 12 meters. The current, especially strengthened after the autumn rains, reached 2 meters per second. It swept away rafts and makeshift boats, often carrying them directly under the fire of German machine guns. Many watercraft simply capsized in the middle of the river due to the strong current. The left bank, from which the crossing began, was marshy in many places, which hindered the approach of heavy equipment and artillery. The right bank, on the contrary, was a steep cliff, which was practically impossible to climb under fire. Captain Nikolai Berezin of the 167th Rifle Division described this situation. Special heroism was shown by the defenders of small bridgeheads, who found themselves in an almost hopeless situation after crossing. The feat of Lieutenant Pyotr Nefedov's group, which captured a tiny bridgehead in the area of the village of Grigorievka, became famous. 37 soldiers who crossed to the right bank found themselves cut off from the main forces. For 3 days, they repelled 17 German counterattacks, destroying 2 tanks and about 100 enemy soldiers. By the time reinforcements arrived, only 11 people remained alive. The Bucharin bridgehead, captured by units of the Voronezh front south of Kiev, became a real meat grinder. The German command threw large tank formations into its elimination. According to participants' recollections, the Germans counterattacked up to 8 times a day. The bridgehead was swept through by artillery from 3 sides. Supplies were transported only at night, and it was practically impossible to evacuate the wounded. Commander of a rifle battalion, Major Grigory Shumeko, recalled, "On the 3rd day we ran out of ammunition. We fought back with stones and captured weapons. The Germans approached 15 to 20 meters. We survived only because a box of grenades was managed to be transported across at night." The Lyutezh bridgehead north of Kiev, initially considered auxiliary, ultimately played a decisive role in the liberation of the Ukrainian capital. Here, Soviet troops managed to establish themselves on a front about 12 kilometers wide and up to 7 kilometers deep. But even this success was paid for with thousands of lives. Especially heavy losses were suffered by sappers, who built crossings under continuous fire. Out of every 10 pontoons launched, at best 3 or 4 reached the opposite bank. The rest were destroyed by enemy artillery, along with their crews and the troops being transported. By the end of September 1943, the Soviet command had concentrated its main efforts on the Bucharin bridgehead, located in a bend of the Dnieper River south of Kiev. This sector initially seemed promising for an offensive on the Ukrainian capital, but the choice proved to be a fatal mistake that turned the bridgehead into a real trap for Soviet troops. Nature itself seemed to have created ideal conditions for the defenders here. The terrain on the right bank was hilly, cut by ravines and gullies, where every height became a natural fortification. The German command quickly assessed the advantages of the relief. General Field Marshal Manstein redeployed the SS Panzer Divisions Reich and Totenkopf, as well as units of the 24th Panzer Corps, to this area. Despite heroic efforts, Soviet troops found themselves in a critical situation. The commander of the Voronezh front, General Vatutin, planned to deliver the main blow here, but encountered insurmountable difficulties. Transporting heavy equipment and artillery across the river proved almost impossible. Tanks drowned while attempting to cross the Dnieper on makeshift crossings. Guards Lieutenant Alexei Voronov, a participant in those events, recalled, "Our tank battalion was crossing on a pontoon bridge. Suddenly, German aircraft attacked. A direct hit destroyed the central pontoon. 3 vehicles went underwater along with their crews. We lost 12 men in a matter of minutes." By mid-October, a stalemate had developed on the Bucharin bridgehead. Soviet troops held territory up to 10 kilometers deep, but every attempt at an offensive was choked in blood. The Germans, controlling the dominant heights, met the attackers with a hail of fire. The losses were monstrous. In 2 weeks of fighting, some rifle divisions lost up to 70% of their personnel. The Soviet command stubbornly continued to build up forces on the bridgehead. On October 24th, an airborne assault was landed here. About 3,000 soldiers from the 1st, 3rd, and 5th Airborne Brigades. The operation ended tragically. Due to planning errors and strong winds, the paratroopers were scattered over a huge area. Many landed directly on German positions or within enemy tank units. Less than half of the paratroopers returned to their own lines. At the end of October, the Stavka of the Supreme High Command finally admitted the error of choosing the Bucharin bridgehead as the main direction of attack. a historic decision was made to regroup the main forces to the Lyutezh bridgehead, located north of Kiev. This regrouping became a brilliant military operation, carried out under the strictest secrecy. Over several nights, tank and mechanized formations as well as artillery units were withdrawn from the Bucharin bridgehead via pontoon bridges and ferry crossings. To conceal the retreat from the enemy, mock-ups of tanks and guns were placed on the abandoned positions. Radio operators continued active radio exchanges, simulating the presence of large forces. The 75-kilometer forced march of General Rybalko's tank army to the Lyutezh bridgehead became the decisive maneuver of the entire Kiev operation. The regrouping allowed a strike to be delivered where the Germans did not expect it. On November 3, 1943, the offensive from the Lyutezh bridgehead began, leading to the liberation of Kiev on November 6th. The Bucharin bridgehead, which cost the lives of thousands of Soviet soldiers, played its tragic role in this operation. It tied down the main enemy forces, allowing for a decisive breakthrough in another sector. But the price of this success proved exorbitantly high. The truth about the losses during the Dnieper crossing remained one of the most closely guarded military secrets for many years. Official Soviet-era statistics cited figures that differed many times over from reality. Only with the declassification of archives in the 1990s did researchers gain access to authentic documents revealing the true scale of the tragedy. According to modern historians, in the first 2 weeks of the operation alone, Soviet troops lost over 100,000 killed and missing in action. Another 200,000 or so were wounded. Especially high losses occurred during the first week of the crossing, when the transfer was carried out using makeshift means under a barrage of enemy fire. A participant in those events, Sergeant Mikhail Konovalov of the 155th Rifle Division, left poignant memoirs. "We crossed on rafts made of logs. Of the 40 men in our company, only 12 reached the right bank. The rest drowned or were killed. The Dnieper literally boiled from explosions and was red with blood. The worst part was that we couldn't help the wounded in the water. The current carried them away, and we had to keep rowing. The fate of those who could not swim was particularly tragic. There were many such individuals in the Red Army, according to some data, up to 40% of the personnel. During the crossing, many soldiers, finding themselves in the water after their raft or boat was destroyed, simply drowned, with no chance of salvation." Medical Major Anna Nikotina, who worked in a field hospital on the left bank, recalled, "We mainly received wounded who had been successfully pulled from the water. But how many remained at the bottom of the Dnieper? No one counted. The soldiers told terrible things, how the current carried away the wounded, how people clung to fragments of rafts and begged for help, but it was impossible to save them. Archival documents indicate that front commands attempted to conceal the true extent of the losses. Reports to Stavka cited understated figures. This was done partly out of fear of incurring Stalin's wrath, and partly to maintain troop morale. Historian Boris Sokolov, in his research, provides data indicating that the real losses during the Dnieper crossing were 2 to 3 times higher than officially recognized figures. According to his estimates, about 40,000 Soviet soldiers and officers perished in the battles for the Bucharin bridgehead alone. Losses were particularly high among young recruits. After the liberation of left bank Ukraine, a large number of local residents, many of whom lacked military training, were mobilized into the Red Army. They were sent to the front with virtually no training. These unseasoned fighters, dubbed Black Infantry, became the first casualties during the crossing. Artillery veteran Pyotr Savelyev recalled, "The worst thing was to watch untrained recruits cross. Many of them had held a weapon for the first time only a few days prior. They didn't know basic things: how to dig in, how to fire. Machine guns mowed them down as soon as they reached the right bank. The tragedy of the Dnieper crossing was compounded by the fact that many of the fallen remained nameless. The bodies of soldiers carried away by the current were found tens of kilometers downstream, and many were not found at all. Thousands of families received notifications of missing in action, which often meant not only a personal tragedy, but also the deprivation of entitled benefits and allowances for the relatives of the deceased. Comparison with other major water barrier crossings in the history of world wars shows that the Dnieper operation was one of the bloodiest. Neither the Allied crossing of the Rhine nor the Soviet crossing of the Oder led to such catastrophic losses. But despite the monstrous price paid for the Dnieper bridgeheads, it was this operation that opened the way to the liberation of right bank Ukraine and became a turning point in the struggle to expel the invaders from Soviet soil. The forcing of the Dnieper is marked not only by the unparalleled heroism of Soviet soldiers, but also by a unique phenomenon in the history of awards, a veritable starfall of gold stars of the hero of the Soviet Union. For this operation, 2,638 people were awarded the highest honor of the motherland, more than for any other battle of the Great Patriotic War. Such a widespread nature of awards had deep political reasons. The High Command sought to emphasize the significance of the liberation of Ukraine and the forcing of the main water barrier on the way to Berlin. Stalin personally ordered not to be stingy with awards to the participants of this operation. On September 28, 1943, a directive was issued to the troops, prescribing that all soldiers who were the first to cross the Dnieper and secure bridgeheads be put forward for the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. This led to an unprecedented number of awards. Among the heroes of the Dnieper were representatives of all branches of service and more than 30 nationalities. However, behind this parade of awards lay tragic fates as well. Many of those awarded received gold stars posthumously. According to some data, up to 40% of all heroes of the Dnieper did not live to receive their awards. Sergeant Ivan Sidorenko from the 140th Rifle Division was put forward for the title of Hero, for his group being the first to secure a tiny bridgehead and repel 7 German counterattacks. When the order for the award arrived at the unit, Sidorenko had already died during the expansion of the bridgehead. Junior Lieutenant Grigory Petrenko and his platoon crossed the Dnieper on a raft of logs under heavy fire. Having secured a foothold on the bank, they repelled 4 counterattacks by superior enemy forces. Petrenko personally destroyed 2 machine gun crews, but was mortally wounded. His mother received the Hero's Star after the war. There were also inverse cases, when awards found their heroes decades later. Private Vasily Korobko was put forward for the title of Hero for saving drowning comrades during the crossing. Under enemy fire, he made 5 swims, pulling 15 wounded soldiers out of the water. However, the documents were lost, and justice triumphed only in 1991, when the 80-year-old veteran finally received his deserved award. The mass nature of the awards also gave rise to a controversial attitude towards the heroes of the Dnieper in the post-war years. Some frontline soldiers who had gone through the entire war without high awards bitterly noted that more gold stars were awarded for one operation than for the battles of Moscow, Stalingrad, and Kursk combined. However, historians agree that the overwhelming majority of awards were absolutely deserved. Everyone who crossed the Dnieper under heavy fire on flimsy rafts and boats performed a feat worthy of the highest award. The fates of the surviving heroes of the Dnieper varied. Many continued military service, while others returned to peaceful professions. Ivan Lyudnikov, who commanded a rifle corps during the crossing, rose to the rank of Colonel General. Artilleryman Vasily Petrov, who lost both arms during the crossing but remained in service, became a Marshal of Artillery. There were also those who could not find themselves in civilian life. The psychological traumas received in the bloody grinder of the forcing left an indelible mark on the souls of the frontline soldiers. Some participants in those events suffered from nightmares until the end of their lives, reliving the horror of the crossing under enemy fire again and again. In Soviet historiography, the crossing of the Dnieper was for many years described as a triumph of military art and mass heroism. Official sources glorified the courage of soldiers and the skill of the command, but carefully avoided the question of the price of this victory. History textbooks, memoirs of military leaders, and artistic works created a heroic image of the operation, where the main focus was on overcoming the mighty water barrier and defeating the enemy on his impregnable line. Special attention was paid to mass heroism, thousands of awards, hundreds of heroes of the Soviet Union, the unprecedented bravery of ordinary soldiers. At the same time, the real figures of losses remained a state secret. Official publications featured data on heavy but justified sacrifices. Specific figures were either not given at all or were understated by several times. Soviet propaganda created a whole galaxy of heroes of the crossing, from front commanders to rank-and-file soldiers. Their feats were glorified in songs, poems, and films. Particularly vivid were the images of soldiers crossing on log rafts under heavy enemy fire. However, behind these heroic scenes lay the terrible truth about thousands of dead, whose bodies remained forever in the Dnieper waters. A turning point in the study of the operation came only in the 90s, when many archival documents were declassified. Historians gained access to authentic reports on losses, command orders, and reports from the field. The revealed picture shocked even specialists. It turned out that the real losses exceeded official data by 2 or 3 times. The documents showed that many decisions were made under the pressure of political factors and not military necessity. Particularly revealing was the declassification of materials about the Bucharin bridgehead and the tragedy of the airborne landing there in October 43rd. Historian Mikhail Melchukov, after analyzing the documents, concluded that the operation was planned with the gravest violations and led to unjustified sacrifices. Modern Russian and Ukrainian historians assess the operation differently. Russian historiography, while acknowledging the tragic scale of losses, nevertheless emphasizes the strategic importance of the crossing, which opened the way for the liberation of right bank Ukraine. Ukrainian researchers more often emphasize the ruthlessness of the Soviet command, which threw poorly trained local residents mobilized in the liberated territories into battle. The fate of the so-called Black Infantry, untrained recruits who were sent to cross practically without preparation, causes particular pain. The discussion about the price of victory remains one of the most acute in the study of the Great Patriotic War. Was it possible to carry out the operation with fewer losses? Was it justified to force the river on the move without preparing special means? These questions still do not have a clear answer. Historian Alexei Isayev believes that strategic necessity dictated precisely such a decision. Any delay would have allowed the Germans to create an impregnable defense on the right bank. His opponents point to the possibility of more thorough preparation and concentration of forces on limited sections. The memory of the heroes and victims of the Dnieper is today immortalized in numerous memorials on the banks of the river. However, many burials have still not been found. The waters of the Dnieper keep the secret of thousands of nameless soldiers who gave their lives for the liberation of their homeland. The forcing of the Dnieper in the autumn of 1943 became not just a military operation, it turned into a turning point of the entire Great Patriotic War. The breakthrough of the Eastern Wall opened the way for Soviet troops to liberate the right bank Ukraine and further advance westward. But at what cost was this strategic success achieved? In world military history, there are few examples of such large-scale forcings of water obstacles. The crossing of the Rhine, carried out by the Allies in March 1945, took place with significant air superiority and the use of special equipment. The forcing of the Vistula by Soviet troops in 1944 was better prepared with engineering means. The Dnieper operation stands out precisely for its improvised nature and colossal sacrifices. Military historian David Glantz, analyzing the events of autumn 1943, notes, "The forcing of the Dnieper became both the greatest triumph and tragedy of the Red Army. Strategic success was achieved at the cost of tens of thousands of lives, many of which could have been avoided with more careful planning." The main lesson of the Dnieper epic is that even the boldest strategic plans must be correlated with the real capabilities of the troops. The order to force the river on the move was dictated by the desire not to allow the enemy to gain a foothold on the western bank. This decision had serious military grounds, but its execution without proper preparation led to exorbitant sacrifices. Another important conclusion concerns the role of improvisation in military affairs. Soldiers and officers, finding themselves before a water obstacle without special crossing means, showed incredible ingenuity. Rafts made of logs and planks, fishing boats, barrels, doors from houses, everything was used. This experience was later taken into account when preparing engineering units for subsequent operations. The Dnieper operation became a symbol of the unbreakable will of the Soviet people to victory. But today, we must remember not only the strategic success, but also those who paid for it with their lives. Thousands of soldiers, whose names remained only in the lists of missing in action, are forever connected with the waters of the great river. In the modern world, where military conflicts continue to claim lives, the memory of the Dnieper tragedy should serve as a reminder of the true cost of war. Every memorial on the banks of the river is not only a symbol of victory, but also a call for peace, for finding solutions that do not require such monstrous sacrifices. The history of the forcing of the Dnieper teaches us that behind every strategic success, behind every victorious report, there are the fates of specific people, and it is our duty to preserve their memory, to learn lessons from the past, and to do everything possible to ensure that such tragedies never happen again.